Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Power Your Story podcast. Wait, this is Podcast Envy, and I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. Now, why did I mess up and say Power Your Story podcast? Well, that was no mistake. Today, I'm featuring some of the fantastic, amazing, wonderful, mind-blowingly talented student producers in my high school podcast mentoring program in Chicago. Say that 5 times fast. Now, before you skip forward to another show or another episode thinking, I am so over high school, let me ask you this. How are you doing? No, seriously. I know I'm being really corny and, whatever right now, but seriously, how are you doing? Right now, it is May, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I don't know about you, but it feels kind of like a cruel joke to me right now to say that. Like, for example, just yesterday, I left a short Voxer message for my business coach, which was all of maybe 13 seconds long, half of which was just me laughing hysterically into the electronic ether. Now, mind you, this was after several other long messages about, well, things that I have messed up recently, things that are beyond my control, economic forces that are shaping my reality in every moment of every day. It was a lot. Anyways, she's tough. She can handle it. In my work as a podcast strategist, consultant, and producer, I have clients, colleagues, and yes, even friends in the nonprofit, corporate, small business, education sectors. And it feels like everyone is struggling in some way right now. Financial, emotional, social, existential. We are all just exhausted. And I don't fully know why. I mean, I've read a lot of articles and blogs and listened to a lot of podcasts about why, so I have some ideas. But honestly, who is out there traipsing through daisy fields in the sunshine with the Beatles' Good Day Sunshine playing in the background of your mind right now? What's your secret to the carefree, happy life? There's got to be at least 5 of you. I see you on Instagram. Or is that a real? Now, in general, in my life, I consider myself to be a pretty strong, stable, mentally healthy person, even when I have gone through some things. And as your trustworthy podcast boss, I would love to say that all of the stressful things roll off my back like water on a duck. I've got this. But lately, the only way I can describe my state of mind is fragile. But I bounce back and I keep on podcasting. And now I'm trying to learn that being mentally healthy doesn't necessarily mean that we don't also fall apart sometimes. So if you are an entrepreneur, a small business owner, a nonprofit employee, an educator, a corporate employee, fearful of company layoffs, a parent, a student, anyone at all, really, and you are struggling, I see you. I feel you. And let's just take a deep breath in together. But this is not a podcast about mental health. Surprise. This is a podcast about podcasting. So let me circle this right back around to why you're really here. In a few moments, I am going to play you some clips from Power Your Story, my student mentees podcast. And of course, I will be linking to the full episodes that I am referencing here in their feed just as soon as they release over the next few days. First of all, we have an episode about mental health and peer support featuring peer support specialist and mental health advocate, Lego aficionado, and my very good friend, Ashley Scott, interviewed by Elvis, Emery, Jules, and Alejandro. And I also want to shout out 2 other episodes that we'll be releasing in the next few days, which are about Sleep and Insomnia, produced by Leonardo and Dwayne, and Mindfulness and the Law of Attraction, produced by May and Haisan. All of these episodes are coming out this month, May 2023, on Power Your Story. So we're going to hear 3 clips from the interview with Ashley Scott. And I'm not just playing these clips in order to brag about how awesome my students really are. Over the last few episodes of Podcast Envy, we have been talking about how to make a more entertaining show to keep your audience engaged, to keep them listening to the end of your episode and coming back episode after episode after episode, rather than trying one episode and then dropping off so that you have to find more and more and more people all the time. This is an audience growth strategy that is about turning the casual listener into a follower, into a raving fan of your show by providing them with both education and entertainment. And this is a formula that I have been teaching to my students even before I realized that it was a conscious formula over the past few years. And so the clips that I am going to share with you, I also have a few things to say specifically about how those students showed up with their podcast hosting skills to facilitate a space where our guest felt safe enough to be extremely vulnerable, open, and conversational in a way where everyone felt seen, heard, understood, and validated. And I think when it comes to the intersection of mental health and podcasting, that is the best outcome we could all hope for. Now, before we get to the clips, I'd love to introduce you to today's podcast angel, the Podcast Envy Refresh. I don't want to say times are tough because, that's not the vibe I want to attract. But you know that feeling when you just know deep in your gut that things could be even better than they are? Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I am not a mental health service provider, though I would love to point you to my clients' podcasts, Conversations with a Wounded Healer and Transforming Trauma. For that, linked in the show notes, of course. But I am a podcast service provider, and I can help you refresh your show. So whether you love making your podcast, but you're just not sure it's working as well for you as it could be, or you have fallen out of love with producing and it's starting to feel like a chore, don't give up yet. Book a 20-minute virtual tea date with me to see if the Podcast Envy Refresh is exactly what the doctor ordered. You can schedule your appointment at thecreativeimposter.com/T420. That's TEAFOR20. When you book, I will send you a short but sweet questionnaire to complete before our call. Once again, that's thecreativeimposter.com/T420 for the Podcast Envy Refresh. And I would love to also mention our podcast angel, Sleep Phones, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you have trouble falling asleep, if someone in the room nearby you snores, Sleep Phones are for you. I think good quality, enjoyable sleep is one of the best ways to care for our mental health. Sleep phones are they're amazing. It's a soft, fleecy headband that you can put on that is not going to fall off of your head or move around. It's like pajamas for your ears, and it is Bluetooth, so you can play your favorite podcast to fall asleep to, and it helps block out some of the other sounds. I think for summer, I'm going to order this silky one that they have that's not fleecy. And right now, you can get 10% off your purchase of Sleep Phones through June 8th, 2023 with the promo code ENVY10. So once again, go to thecreativeimposter.com/sleep phones, enter promo code ENVY10 to get 10% off, and then they're going to send me a little thank you gift for sending you their way. And now I want to play you a clip from Power Your Story, our interview with Ashley Scott. And the reason why I pulled this clip is not only because Ashley's sharing really valuable stories and insights for us in terms of mental health, but the reason why I'm sharing it on a podcasting episode is because after that, Emery thanks Ashley for sharing that. As the podcast host, Emery did not just hear Ashley's answer and move on to the next question. Emery paused at the end of the response, having fully listened to what Ashley was saying, being fully present with her, and then acknowledged and reflected back to her what she was saying.
But that also goes into my next question I had is like, what parts of your career do you struggle with or have difficulty with at times?
Honestly, just like you, Emery, I struggle with anxiety. So I like to share with people my diagnosis because I think that it is helpful. So I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I was diagnosed with panic disorder, which is a type of anxiety disorder. And I was diagnosed with PTSD recently. And so those things are really challenging. Like it can be really debilitating, some of the experiences that come from that. And so that is a really hard one. Managing my own mental health and really staying within my body and in my space and maintaining my hobbies and things that I enjoy while I have this purpose and this goal and really this inspiring mission that I have inside to help other people. I also have to have like, it's not a balance, it's more so I have to remind myself every day to check in with how much of the energy that I have every day, how much of that did I give to myself? And so some days it's really unbalanced. Some days I've given 98% to other people. And I'm like, wow, that's not enough for myself. So the next day I kind of have to adjust that. All of that is challenging, as well as having a job that it doesn't require you to share your story, but it's kind of like as a peer support specialist, you take the job of sharing your story. You allow yourself to share your story in order to help people, right? To share hope and to help them through their challenging times. Sometimes people's stories look just like yours. Particularly, I work with youth and young adults, and that's really where my passion is. And so I see young adults, particularly young women, going through the things that I went through, and it breaks my heart. And sometimes I get really triggered by that, and I have to remind myself and have coping skills and have like, what would I call it? Like a ritual of some sort to help myself get back to me and to set boundaries around, okay, I believe in this person. I believe that they have the skills, they have the tools, and I'm helping them, right? I'm a shoulder to lean on in a sense, but I am not the reason why they are going to be successful. I am not the reason why they are going to be able to recover. They are going to be the ones. And I'm just going to help them to see that. And so sometimes it really is hard to separate yourself from other people's stories when they look just like yours. And you're like, oh my goodness, I remember when I was going through that and how hard it was. And you can really go back there mentally. And it is really hard. So every now and again, you just have to come to a ritual, like I was saying before, of just reminding yourself of who you are and why you're doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I understand like how hard it must be to like share some stuff, like especially like diagnosis, because I don't like sharing that either. But I want to like let you know that I'm sure many people are grateful to hear that from you, and I am too, that like you're able to share your story like that. And I'm glad that you're learning how to like sort of like balance yourself also when it comes to your job. So thank you so much again for that.
So, this is the reason why I pulled this clip. And I actually use this as an example for the students in my program as well. That yes, you can prepare your questions all day long. You can do your guest research. You can know what it is that you want to talk to your guest about. And yet, part of being a star podcast host is being present, listening, reflecting back. Not only does this help to, as Karen Yates talked about in our recent episode about being an awesome podcast host, not only does it help your guest to feel more comfortable and to open up even more than they might have otherwise, it also helps your audience to digest and process and fully embrace what it is your guest is sharing with them, especially when it is a deep or difficult or emotional topic. Having this host reflection in your interview can help your audience to also fully be present with your guest in the same way that you, the host, are being. So that is why I chose this first clip with Emery to showcase. The next clip is the same interview, but this is another podcasting student named Jules. And this question came a little bit later after Emery's section. So the students, basically, when they do a group interview, they kind of like hand it off. They pass the mic back and forth to each other. So this came later. And Jules had planned questions, but then Jules actually went a little bit off script from what their planned questions were and decided to build off of what Emery and Ashley had been talking about. So again, Jules, as the co-host, was present with the conversation that they were having, even though it wasn't their time to be the host necessarily in that moment, and then decided to build off of that with the following question.
Hi, Ashley. I'm Jules. So earlier with Emery, you had mentioned how you tell your own stories about your own mental health. So my question was, how do you deal with your own mental health? What do you do to deal with it? Do you have self-care days, or do you journal? What do you do?
For my own mental health, there's a couple of things that I do. I have a therapist that I work with. I have doctors that I work with that help me to understand medication, for anxiety. I've gone through kind of a new journey of understanding medication for depression for myself. And that has been challenging. I've learned a lot of things. On the other end, a lot of the things that I do for my mental health is really just slowing down and kind of counteracting my thoughts. Sometimes I really go into just understanding what my everyday thoughts are, kind of having compassion for the things that I'm going through. So let's just say I woke up and I started the morning with a headache and I stubbed my toe and maybe something that I wanted didn't really come through. And those things are making me feel really bad in my body physically. I start to have negative thoughts that say, Ashley, you're so dumb. Why can't you do anything right? And it spirals from there. In that moment where I'm having thoughts, I try to stop and I try to say to myself, Ashley, this is normal. Sometimes you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes things don't go right, and that's okay. And every day doesn't have to be a great day. Some days are going to be really great, other days, not so much. And that's a part of being human. Just really saying things in a way that I would want a friend to say to me instead of saying things to myself that a bully or enemy would say to me. And that's kind of where my brain goes in a negative way. It starts to say really mean things to me. And I start saying really mean things to myself. And that means I start doing really mean things to myself. And I don't want to do that. I really want to be able to help myself. So that's really where the everyday part of my journey is, really trying to take things slow and having compassion for myself. That's really where it starts. And over time, when I say, okay, I'm having a bad day, I'm going to clock out. I'm not going to give up on my dreams. I'm not giving up, What it is that I'm clocking out right now. I'm taking a moment. Maybe it is 5 minutes. Maybe it's the rest of the day. I'm unplugging and I'm going to watch some Uncle Grandpa. It's one of the cartoons that I watch that for me is when I'm at my lowest, it really helps me come back to neutral because the colors are vibrant. It's really silly and goofy, and it doesn't really evoke a lot of emotions. So that's kind of a practical thing, like an actual thing that I do.
That's actually like very interesting because I actually do the same with like watching a show or something that like takes my mind off of it. Because I like have my own comfort show that like helps me like throughout the day when I like wake up feeling, I guess I don't know, feeling like very blue. So that helps a lot. And I find it surprising where you like mentioned how you like start saying positive things to yourself because I know that usually people like deal with like once they have like negative thoughts take over, it's hard for them to like draw themselves back into like trying to like say positive things about themselves. So I actually find that very surprising and very helpful. I think I might start taking that advice myself as well.
Part of the reason I pulled this clip with Jules as the host is because, as I mentioned, Jules was present for the whole conversation and was building off of what their co host had started, where their co host led the conversation, and then where Ashley, the guest, took it. And then Jules was able to pick that up and continue from there, even though that wasn't what was planned or scripted. And that is following the lead with your guest, still being in control of the container of the interview, but being able to veer off course in a direction that is naturally going, that is going to be interesting and beneficial for your listener. And then Jules follows up in a similar way that Emery did by sharing their own reflection of what Ashley said. That's actually very interesting because I actually do the same thing with like watching a show or something like that to take my mind off of it. And then Jules shares about how sometimes they wake up feeling off and how they're going to take that advice and try it themselves. So, this is a way of relating to the guest, acknowledging that what the guest is sharing is valuable, and setting an example for your listeners, for your audience that they can learn from. This is like super advanced podcasting hosting stuff. This is about being an empathetic listener. This is about critical thinking. This is about being present in the moment. And this is about thinking about your guest, yourself, and your listener all at the same time. And then the third clip that I wanted to share is kind of an example of the fruits of your labor if you do all of those things that I just told you. So, this third clip is from one of the co hosts of the episode, Elvis. And Elvis actually had asked the first few sort of establishing questions at the beginning of the interview. What is peer support? How did you get into this work? You know, all those kind of establishing background things. And by the end of the interview, because his colleagues and co hosts had asked these other deeper questions, and Ashley had shared so openly about her own struggles with mental health, her struggles with anxiety. We even touched on the topic of suicidal ideation and, you know, personal stories of what has happened in her family and things like that. That at the end of the interview, we always, whenever we have an interview guest in Power Your Story, we always open an opportunity at the end, if we have time, if we've gone through our planned interview with the students who are producing, we always have other students that are there listening to the interview because it's kind of like a class, right? So we might have like 15 students in the Google Meet while we're recording, and maybe 4 of them are actually hosting the interview and the other 11 or whatever are listening. And some are listening better than others, don't get me wrong. But we always open up an opportunity at the end of the interview to see if anyone else had any questions that they wanted to ask our guest. And sometimes it might be a student who was listening, who was not one of the original producers of the particular interview, or it might be one of the co-hosts of the interview who has since thought of a new question that they wanted to make sure to ask. And so that's the case with Elvis. Elvis had started off the interview, and then at the end, after we had gone through all of these other deeper topics, Elvis chimed in and said,
But also, I want to add, like, for me, I have a hard time for my mental health because since I have anxiety too, and also I've been having those kind of feel like nervousness, like butterfly in their stomachs, and also like sweaty hands, like you're really nervous. So I've been feeling that before. I just want to share that.
Yeah, those are really like typical things that happen with anxiety. So I really understand that. Even though I'm okay with public speaking, I still get nervous like all the time. Like I got nervous today and I just kind of had to move around so that I didn't get too much in my head today because, my brain is like, okay, well, if you practice the questions or if you think of all the questions that could possibly ask you, then maybe you'll be perfect and maybe it will, and maybe you won't have anxiety. And the answer is that that's not true. And I'm still going to be nervous and I have to just breathe and sometimes distract myself and do the best I can and know that whenever I go somewhere, I'm just going to do the best that I can. And usually people really like that.
what was interesting is we asked, does anybody else have any questions for Ashley? And Elvis, rather than asking a question, he felt like this was a safe space for him to share what he had been struggling with on the topic. And it wasn't even a question. It was just, I hear everything you're saying, and I want to share this with you as well. And Ashley is a brilliant guest who, again, we're talking about being present. We're talking about showing up to be of service, being open, wanting to be helpful. And so she responds empathetically. Yeah, those are really typical things that happen with anxiety. And then she gives an example that further validates what he's saying. And so the fact that the exchange that was happening in real time between the hosts who were showing up prepared, but also present and flexible within that container gave space for Ashley to show up fully prepared, but flexible and open to relate back to them in real time, created the space for that student to feel comfortable to share his experiences. And this is what I'm talking about when before I played these clips, I said that this example of this exchange in the context of a podcast interview happened in a way where the container allowed the guest to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, open, and conversational, and also for our hosts to be that way as well, in a way where everyone felt seen, heard, understood, and validated. And honestly, like you can talk about podcasting for marketing, you can talk about podcasting for sales, you can talk about podcasting for growing your audience, you can talk about podcasting for business. To me, this is the reason why I love podcasting. This is the value. And not every show is about mental health, like, of course. But this kind of open exchange that happens on a very intimate level that the audience, the listeners then get to listen into later, that's it. That's the magic. I want to remind you that this full interview, as well as the episodes about sleep and insomnia and mindfulness in the law of attraction, will be coming out this month, May 2023, on Power Your Story. And here's a preview. First from Leo and Dwayne, then May and Haisan.
One thing that I'll say about insomnia is that it's kind of more like something that is hand to hand. I guess you can call it like a sidekick with depression, because like once you have insomnia, it kind of leads toward depression a little bit, because like just imagine wanting to go to sleep so bad, but it's just like you sit there, you close your eyes for hours upon hours and you just like can't go to sleep. Like just really think about that. It's like, man, it's like, that's crazy. So like, what are the main causes of it? Like what really happens? That's the main question.
What causes insomnia is by eating habits that causes you to stay awake, like drinking tons and tons of coffee or drinking other energy drinks like Red Bull and Monster energy drink and Gatorade. Other factors that causes insomnia might be like depression or hyper energy that is still being stored in your body but hasn't been like worn off.
Right, yeah.
And I also forgot to mention about how some people is this term called workaholic, which is used to
Oh,
describe someone who
yeah.
is addicted to working more than the average person at a job. It is a mental health
Oh,
condition too
yeah.
that's caused by stress.
You have to think, as a kid, we're not really used to that much responsibility as an adult. So that type of stuff and handling our emotions to the point where we can prevent like gaining depression off of like being overworked and like having so much to do at one time, with us not knowing how to handle that makes us more vulnerable to stuff like you said, like insomnia and things of that nature.
I do. I love yoga.
It's really cool. I did some root chakra yoga. I don't know if you know anything about the chakras. And it actually really put me in my body because it was like visualizations with it as well. And it was really cool.
I remember I did root chakra yoga and I just felt like I was levitating, to be honest.
I think mindfulness also helps with overthinking as well. And when you're just sitting there and it takes a negative toll on your mind and you're just having a bunch of negative thoughts and they're like backing up onto each other, it can be really stressful. But I think being mindful of other people is also important as well. I'm not just one of those people to just walk away when you're talking to me, trying to get my attention. I'm going to listen to you because I think everybody should be listened to. It's like really simple, but it's still a mindful act. And I think a lot of things can be implemented in a way like that where it can boost your life in some way and boost another person's life.
I feel like you have persuaded me to try to be more mindful every day. And I want to try mindfulness meditations now.
Oh, and I nearly forgot one more episode for this month: heavy metal and mental health with Justin Bowling. That interview was hosted by Carlos, Essence, Leslie, and Chu, and produced by Aldo. You'll hear Leslie's question in the clip.
You mentioned that metal has helped you through some dark times and mental health challenges. Can you say more about that?
About the time I got into metal, I was going through a rough time, something a lot of us experience at times. And for me personally, a lot of that was I never liked to feel angry or show anger in any way. I always try to be a very positive person, and I still am. But I was really struggling with that back and forth of having these feelings that I didn't want to show. And when I discovered metal, I all of a sudden discovered a lot of people who were sharing those same feelings I were having and were very comfortable being very vocal about their struggles and especially dealing with negative emotions like anger and things like that. And so it really connected with me to help me feel like I wasn't alone in what I was feeling. And I think that's a really important part of both art and metal, is that in a way it's a language without having to speak, of being able to convey emotions that a lot of us have trouble dealing with. And so that can really help us find our full selves, find every part of our being that is more than just trying to be happy or just trying to be other things, because all of those emotions exist. And I think it's important for us to be able to understand that and not be afraid of ourselves. So I feel like we're luckily living in a world where it's becoming much more appropriate and acceptable to talk about how we feel and who we are. That's a very positive change that's been happening. And I do think it's important that mental health is something we regularly talk about, just so people don't feel like they're alone.
And so that is what I wanted to share with you today. How do you turn the casual listener into a follower, into a raving fan? You create this kind of safe, intimate container to talk about things that are really important. You make the space for your guests to feel seen and heard. You make the space to be present, and you make the space for your audience to feel seen and heard. And you compel them to be present in this experience with you. To hear those full episodes, follow Power Your Story in your favorite podcast app or listen in at poweryourstorypodcast.com. Please remember to reach out if you want a podcast envy refresh with me. And hey, take care of yourself, okay? Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.